if you had not come to this meeting and you are in sort of like in the development field, you would have expected to hear about, I don't know, micro-lending or institutions or corruption or a bunch of other things that are sort of like top of mind in people in the development field. Each one of those concerns comes from a certain paradigm, a certain view of what makes the world tick. So if you think that the fundamental problem in the world is sort of like the distribution of capital, then you see poor people as not having access to capital. So you believe that if we just could get them capital, then the world would change, and so the microfinance industry is going to radically transform the world. But the microfinance industry is now 50 years old. After 50 years, they have about 200 million clients. Cell phone companies are about 20 years old. After 20 years, they have how many customers? 4 billion customers. So something has caused that industry not to be as revolutionary as people expected. Now the scholarship is out and saying that they're not really that big. And now that you think about it, if I give you X amount of pesos now and I demand X plus some amount of pesos in the future from you, what has to happen in between for you to be better off after paying the X plus something pesos in the future, right? So that may have something to do with what you think is really the source of value that was going to be facilitated by money, right? So if people in your town, the only thing they know is how to make a certain cookie, and you give them money, right, they'll make more cookies. And with more cookies, the price of cookies will collapse, everybody will go broke, and that's part of the reason why, right? It didn't make a difference, right? If you believe that the whole thing is about institutions, then you'll work on these national level institutions, and you will be puzzled at the fact that, there are municipalities in Mexico that are 50 times richer than other municipalities, even though, so that you have a Korea in Mexico, given the laws, the institutions, the corruption, the abuse, and so on, while there is a Chiapas in Mexico. So depending on what you think you see in the world, it generates some ideas of how you want to act in the world. And we've taken the view that sort of like the fundamental thing that's out there in the world is collective know-how. And this collective know-how is what underpins the things that your communities are able to make. To do something, you have to know how to do it. It's kind of like tautological, right? But this know-how is not something that you buy, you sell, you move. It's something that exists only in brains. And it moves very complicated ways between brains. It takes a long time to train a brain to perform a task. And for a long time, we started to think, oh, okay, so it's education. Education, 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 as Tony Blair said in his, what year campaign? 2001 or something. 97. No, his re-election, I think it was. Yeah. But what you saw today also is that it's not education, lack of education, that explains the problem, say, in Chiapas. Right? If a Chiapaneco wants to be as rich, as wealthy as another Mexican, an average Mexican, he would need to have 4 more years of schooling than the average Mexican. There's something other than education that is explaining his low productivity. And then when you start thinking about it, I use shirts, I use shoes, I use glasses. I never learned to do these things in school. So it would be impossible for us to ask our teachers to be able to teach all the know-how that is in our society. The know-how that is in our society is disseminated throughout the networks of people are doing things in different firms and different activities and different other things. You might teach somebody to read and write and do math in school, but there's so much more know-how that gets used in production that will never be replicated by a school system. how would you train the teachers to teach everything that a society knows? You would have to sort of like recreate the society within the schools. So, you know, the world has also been extremely optimistic about education being sort of like the mantra of development. And now we're finding case after case in which education improvements have been significant and economic improvements have not followed up. So that's why we have stumbled into this idea that, you know, when we see the world out there, it is not something, this collective know-how that drives development is not something that exists. It's not schooling, it's not capital, it's not just the general rules of the game. It's a substance that is more complicated. It moves with people. It explains why, in spite of the telecommunications revolution and so on, business travel is growing at twice the speed of the world economy. So you're still needing to move these brains around. And it explains a set of puzzles of why you have these great divergences of income, say within Mexico. That it's the diversity of letters in your community that explains why you have low productivity, few words, short words in poor areas of Mexico. And if you put the same Chiapaneco in a place that is more diverse, he does great. So that leads us to a different policy agenda, a different way of thinking of how to make progress, a different way of helping governments focus on things that might be important, a different way of thinking about what policy is. Policy is not a set of instruments. Policy is an informational problem, that governments don't know where the problems are, governments don't know where the opportunities lie, and governments don't know ex ante what to fix. So government is really not an antibiotic, is an immune system. Your immune system is there. It is not designed to do one task. It is designed to figure out what the problem is and fix it, right? So it's not an antibiotic. It's a system that will generate the antibodies as it sees fit. And we have to sort of like build these systems, this capacity of government to fix problems, to identify opportunities, to be responsive. And to do that, it's all, in essence, a deep information problem, right? So this information revolution is happening at a time when we are thinking about these issues. So in some sense, every period is defined by the ways of thinking of its leading sciences. So somebody mentioned, I think it was Danny Roderick, that in the heydays of physics, economists wanted economics to look like physics, so they wanted to have the model of the world in the same way that there's the physical laws of the world, right? But these days, we now are seeing sort of like data science and machine learning and so on as sort of like the sexy topic of the day, but it's appearing because we are trying to make sense of data. And in the process of trying to make sense of data, these guys have figured out a little bit what it means to learn, what induction means, what it means to generalize from data, what it means to be certain about what you're learning from data. And so the machine learning revolution, if you want, will permeate the way we think of what it means to do policy. And that's why we saw Sendel Mullainathan trying to think through what will be the consequences of having more of this ability to understand what induction means. And induction is learning from examples. Like what Leslie Valiant mentioned, okay, I want to know what's an elephant and what's not an elephant. Kids figure that out pretty quickly by showing them things that are elephants and non-elephants, and then you show them something that they've never seen, and they'll say, oh, looks to me like an elephant, right? So that capacity to interpret the world, to see the world, to deduce from your previous experience is something that our brains do all the time. It's what know-how has a lot to do with, the ability of Rafa Nadal to answer the serve. But it's something that traditional science has looked down on. Because if it's not deduced from first principles, if it's not Cartesian, it's not science. If it's not understandable, it's not science. And the funny thing that is happening is that now we understand that we can compute and solve more things than we can understand. And that's going to be a humbling thing vis-a-vis our relationship with machine learning. That the machine will learn and we won't. Because it knows how to solve the problem and we don't know how it did it. We know the general principles it followed, but and that's the reason in part why the sciences have not liked very much this data mining thing, and it has been sort of like a negative aspect of it. But anyway, we're trying to make the world a better place, and we're trying to do so by trying to rethink what this world is, what makes it tick, and how we can trigger better improvements in it.